I'm recording my homily for the Feast Day of Christ the King, which is also the 34th week of Ordinary Time, and it is the very last week. So this week we're getting ready to enter into the season of Advent. And I'm at Lake 22, which is just up the Mountain Loop Highway outside of Marysville and Granite Falls, that area. It's very cold here, but after the hike, it's not so cold. So in Christ the King, we're talking about Jesus Christ as being a king. And the thing is that Jesus is a different type of king. If we try to take Jesus and just put him into the mold of the kings that we know of, it's not going to work. He's going to be a very bad fit as a king. And sometimes I almost wonder why we call him a king if there wasn't a better term. But here's what I mean. So I'm reading a book right now. It's my favorite book. This is like the fifth or sixth time I've read it, on St. Francis of Assisi. And the book is by Ivan Gobry, by Ignatius Press. I'll try to remember to put that on the screen if you're interested. I think it's one of the best books on St. Francis of Assisi. Most of the books on him, I feel like, really don't capture the whatever that word is, the magnanimousness of St. Francis of Assisi. But anyways, the author, Ivan Gobry, begins a book. He's a historian, so he begins by putting everything in the context of what's happening in the world at the time. And there were a lot of very powerful kings at that time, and they often were either battling against each other, or cities were battling against each other. And so you get a sense, though, very quickly of very strong leadership. And so these kings, and every once in a while they would come together and they would form a crusade or do something like that, which at that time usually ended badly. But these kings were people who were very powerful. They certainly exercised their authority. People were often inspired by their leadership because they would leave their homelands to go off into battle. They were all military strategists. I mean, even Rome, even the Vatican, in some sense, had the temporal responsibility of defending the people against invading hordes and things like that. And so the leadership very much had this powerful sense to it. And so when Jesus Christ comes along, and Jesus comes along in a different time, but still you have the Caesars and the Roman leaders and all these guys. And Jesus comes along and he just doesn't fit that at all. In fact, if you were to, the other night when I was praying, I outlined what his kingdom looks like. And in Jesus' kingdom, he allows mutiny. He allows mutiny. And so in the church, if somebody is a heretic, if somebody's preaching things that are not true, that are not part of the gospel, he allows it to happen. And he seemingly doesn't necessarily do anything about it. And this is his kingdom after all. So he allows mutiny, but not just on like a much broader perspective. He allows mutiny also interiorly. Every time, we do horrible sins, every time we commit mortal sins, even venial sins, there's a certain level of mutiny to the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And he allows it. And so already you get a sense that his kingdom or his kingship is kind of weak. It's like, come on, Jesus, let's, do something. This person did something really bad. Do something about, and so he doesn't. So you get a sense almost that he's weak. And some would dare say that his kingdom is rather pathetic when you look at it in light of how we normally look at our kings. Now, if you go in the gospel for this weekend, Matthew chapter 25, you have the sheep and the goats. This is a very powerful story that Jesus uses, or analogy that Jesus uses to talk about salvation. And so in this story of the sheep and the goats, he talks about it in terms of people in his kingdom. And so he says in his kingdom, there's a phrase, and I don't have it in front of me, but there's a phrase that he uses where he says, and for those of you who did it to the least of my brothers, you did it to me, to the least of my brothers. And so in Jesus' kingdom, he's looking at those who are his brothers and sisters, right? And who are his brothers and sisters in his kingdom? The hungry, the thirsty, the strangers, the ill, the imprisoned. All of these are people that he is saying this is his family. Now, once again, in a king's family, is his family normally hungry or thirsty or strangers or ill or in prison? No, they're the princes and the dukes and they're all the other leaders. We call that nepotism today, but that's what kings would do. They would stack all their family members around their kingdom, and also it assured obedience and allegiance and loyalty. Jesus' loyalty is to the people who are suffering. Now, in a worldly standard, that seems pathetic. And so we have to go deeper with this to really understand Jesus' kingdom, because his kingdom is intrinsically different. If we ever try to make the Catholic Church to be strong, to be domineering in the world, to be powerful, to win, then we're not promoting Jesus' kingdom. I wish I had a cross on me, because if I had a cross, I could show you the absolute center of his kingdom. It's the only time he was crowned, and it was the only time he had a throne. And that's when, in his kingdom, his people killed him. Now, Jesus doesn't lament that. When he rises from the dead, he doesn't say, oh man, look at my people. They're so pathetic. They killed me. And here I was their king. He doesn't do that. He says, this is to mark my kingdom, that I am willing to die for my people, for the hungry, the ill, the thirsty, the strangers, etc., etc. And that's where he wore his crown. Now, I want you to ask yourself, do you want to be part of that kingdom 100%? Or do you want to be part of that kingdom 50%? And then kind of 1 foot also in the earthly kingdom, where we're kind of seeking, worldly things. It doesn't work. They're diametrically opposed to each other. On Thanksgiving Day, we celebrated the feast day of a Blessed Miguel Pro. And so Blessed Miguel Pro was a Jesuit priest, a very young Jesuit who, during the time of the Mexican Revolution, fled Mexico, fled his homeland so that he could finish his studies as a Jesuit. And so he went to the United States, he was in California, eventually went to Europe, finished his studies, was ordained a priest, and then with some of his confreres decided to go back to Mexico. Now, there was a couple years during the Mexican Revolution when the leaders believed, because they were buying into Karl Marx and Marxism, they believed that if you want to control the people, if you want to have authority over the people, you have to eliminate any other allegiances that they have, especially in religion. And so religion was seen really as just another temporal kingdom that was fighting for the allegiance of the people. And so the leaders felt like they had to destroy that, which meant they had to destroy the faith of the people. And so they went through this very brutal campaign of killing all the Catholic leaders if they resisted, or at the very least causing them to flee into exile. There are pictures in Mexico of people hanging by their neck from telephone poles along the streets, because they were Catholics who refused to give up their allegiance to their king, to Jesus. Now, Blessed Miguel Pro, Father Miguel Pro, comes back to Mexico knowing that most likely he'll either end up in prison or he'll end up dead. And so eventually he was caught, and so he was in a very secretive way was ministering to the people. And he was eventually caught. He was put on trial. They trumped up some charges against him, and they eventually convicted him, and the punishment was execution. And they decided they were going to make an example of him. So by publicizing, by taking pictures of his execution and putting it in the newspapers, putting it everywhere, they thought that it would destroy the faith, the allegiance of these people to Jesus Christ. Well, the whole thing backfired on him. There's pictures of Blessed Miguel Pro with his arms extended, and right before they shot him, he just simply said, "Viva Cristo Rey," right? Long live Christ the King. And then they executed him. And there's pictures of it. If you want to see it, they're powerful. And so they put those pictures out there. They thought it would demoralize people. But when they had his funeral, there were thousands and thousands of people. The piazza outside was packed with people. It completely backfired. And that's because earthly leaders, whenever they put themselves diametrically opposed to the other king, to Jesus Christ, and try to destroy the faith of people, it always backfires on them. The only time that the earthly kingdom wins is when Satan secretly convinces people that there is no battle. And so we as Catholics become lukewarm. But when confronted, when put out there, of course we're going to choose our one true king. When I was growing up, there was a coach I had, and I probably already talked about him in one of my other videos a while back. And I know maybe it sounds unusual for me to compare him to Jesus, but I think in this sense he was very much like a Jesus figure for me growing up. And I say that because he was like a big brother. Now, big brothers are different than fathers. Fathers teach lessons. Fathers have authority, and we always give that, we're supposed to give that respect and obedience to fathers. But fathers also tend to be a little gentler than big brothers. Big brothers, when they want to make a point, they make it, right? And they're a little bit tougher. And they love, good big brothers, they love, but they also are a bit tougher than maybe a father figure. And so I think in some ways this coach I had growing up was kind of like that. And so growing up, I remember this one day when he gave us a choice, and he says, all right, he says, either you can go out and you can play soccer, or you can stay here with me, and we're going to do push-ups, we're going to do sit-ups. He says, I'm going to exercise you into the ground, and you're going to run, and you're going to run, and you're going to run. It's your choice. Now, this was the only time he gave us a choice, but he gave us a choice. I like soccer, so I went and played soccer. But the whole time I was playing soccer, I kept looking over. And I kept watching them. My classmates who chose not to play soccer, but chose to exercise and run and run and run. Well, at the end of the class, during the class, I knew something was up. I knew he was trying to teach us something, but I didn't quite get it. Well, after the class was done, he said to the class, he says, those of you who chose soccer, he says, I'm thoroughly disappointed in you. Because you're going to be able to go through life, and you're always going to have choices. You're always going to have choices. He says, and if you always choose the easier path, your life will amount to nothing. Now, I was in the 3rd grade, right? It was a tough lesson for a 3rd grader, but I'll tell you, I will never, ever forget that lesson. And it was a big brother lesson. The thing is, with this coach, I knew he loved us. You could tell the way he showed us respect. He would delegate us. He would put us in leadership roles. He was always trying to stretch us, always trying to get us to be the best we could be. And whether it was as individuals or as a team. And that was one of those days where I'll never forget, where he says, there's something different here. Now, the thing is, his name was Coach Chuy. And Chuy is a nickname in Spanish for Jesus, which is, as we know, the name of Jesus, right? So he was kind of like a big brother. Now, I use that example because in the gospel today, Jesus says that he is the brother to all those in his kingdom who are in need, those who are beat down, those who need help, right? He's a big brother. A different type of kingdom. You see, when we're at Mass and Jesus Christ gives us his body and his blood, he gives us the Eucharist, it's what a family member would do. It's what a brother would do for his loved ones, right? He would give of himself. And so Jesus does that every time we come to Mass. And he's not just sharing with us like top down, he's sharing with us like equal. And what kind of king does that? What kind of king shares his royalty with all his people, especially the downtrodden, especially those who need the most help? Different type of kingdom, right? It's a kingdom of the cross. It's a beautiful kingdom. It's a powerful kingdom. But we can't sell that kingdom out or try to pervert it into something that it was never meant to be, like an earthly kingdom. It's very different. I want to give one last example. So at the same time when I was growing up, we had a priest who was in our parish, and And he was never the pastor, but he was always the vicar. He always helped out. His name was Father James. Now, Father James, I can relate to him because he gave very long homilies. We were, as altar servers, we would sit up there in the sanctuary, and on the back wall was a clock, and we could see him. We were like, oh my gosh, he's going for a 30-minute this time. You give some long homilies. But Father James, so when he was a young man, he knew he wanted to be a priest, and he kept going to different religious orders, and he kept applying and trying to get into religious orders, and they always turned him down because of his health. His health was very poor. He had some very severe allergies, one of which was to wine or alcohol, and so you can imagine how they would be hesitant to ordain him a priest when he had that kind of an allergy. But he had lots of health issues, and so they kept turning him down. And at one time in a story, he just related to us, and he said he reached like this 15th religious order, and he said, all right, Jesus, this is it. If you say no, it's no. Well, they said yes. So he joined the religious order. Now, when we left Texas, when we finally left, he was 90 years old, and he was still working full time as a chaplain in the Army hospital there at Beaumont Army Hospital, and doing what he always wanted to do was just to be a good priest. Now, I bring him up also because he ended every single one of his homilies with the same way. And he said, and that is why hopefully one day we all hear Jesus say to us, and come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, I'm not finishing my homily that way, but that's how he always finishes homilies. Now, did you recognize that quote? That is from the gospel today. He understood. Now, Father James, I always kind of saw him in a sense like a big brother, because he wasn't the pastor, right? He wasn't the one up in charge, but he was always very present to our family. And he would often ask me, and he would say, have you ever thought about being a priest? And my answer was always the same. It's like, it's not for me. It's not for me. Well, I wonder if he was praying, and he eventually won that prayer, obviously, but he was praying for a vocation there. This kingdom of Jesus Christ, we must remember, and we can't water it down. We must resist the temptation to water down. This is a kingdom that is different. It is a kingdom where we perceive in each and every one of our brothers and sisters the same royalty, the same royal blood that Jesus Christ has, because he shares it with us. He willingly, as this big brother who gave his life for us, he shares it with us every Sunday, every day, every time we come to Mass. That's powerful. That's a powerful kingdom. Never be ashamed of it. All right? All right, next week I will see you in Advent. God bless.